Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bed-Stuy Farmer. My name's Cliff and today we're here in the beautiful Moffett Street Community Garden in Bushwick, New York, where we're going to take a look at one of my favorite garden vegetables, cucumbers. After, I've got a quick fridge pickle recipe that'll take advantage of some of the beautiful herbs and spices that we have growing in the garden, and of course, our cucumbers. So let's get going. Cucumber, also known as Cucumis sativus, is a widely cultivated creeping vine plant in the gourd family that bears cuneiform fruits which are used as vegetables. There are three main types of cucumber varieties: slicing, pickling, and burpless or seedless cucumbers. The cultivation of cucumbers can be traced back over 3,000 years to India and was probably introduced to parts of Europe by the Greeks or the Romans. Records of cucumber cultivation appear in France in the early 9th century, in England in the 14th century, and here in North America by the mid-16th century. Cucumber fruits consist of about 95% water. In botanical terms, the cucumber is classified as a pepo, which is actually a type of botanical berry with a hard outer rind and no internal divisions. However, much like tomatoes and squashes, it's often perceived, prepared, and eaten as a vegetable. A few cultivars of cucumbers are parthenocopic, the blossoms which create seedless fruit without pollinators. But the most common varieties of cucumbers that you'll see grown in the garden are self-incompatible, which means they require the pollen from another cucumber plant in order to produce seeds and fruits. One notable exception are varieties of lemon cucumbers, which are self-compatible and thus great for putting on a balcony or a window. This is why in the garden we like to plant lots of varieties and quantities of cucumbers to encourage cross-pollination. So we're coming up on the start of July, and this is such an exciting time to be in the garden. The cucumbers have put out their tendrils in all directions, which help them support their canopy of leaves and then protect the fruit that's growing below. Generally, traditional cultivars produce male blossoms first and then female in about equivalent numbers. The female flowers will produce the fruit. And if you take a close look at the base or inside of the flower, you can see the difference between the male and the female flowers. From here, we can see fruit starting to form out on our vines. And rather than in the first bed where we saw the cucumbers running all across, we're training these cukes to actually grow up a string trellis. And this has the advantage of not only supporting the plant and the fruit, but also increasing airflow and keeping the fruit off the ground. And while this method will result in a slight decrease in fruit production per plant, you can fit so many more plants into a confined space that it's well worth it. Likewise, we're growing some cucumber varieties in containers and using cages to encourage the vines to grow up. So enough about all the cucumber plants. Let's grab some of these babies and head back into the kitchen and make some pickles. Thanks for coming back to the kitchen with me. This pickle recipe is super simple and a great way to use some of those fresh cucumbers when you start to get overwhelmed with your summer harvest. We're going to start by mixing a really simple brine, which is going to be 1.5 cups of water, to which we're going to add 3 tablespoons of vinegar. Now I'm using apple cider vinegar, but white vinegar would work just fine too. And to that, we're going to add 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. Kosher salt and pickling salts are basically the exact same thing, but some kosher salts will have some anti-caking agents that pickling salts will never have. So we're going to go ahead and give this a good whisk to ensure that all of the salt is nicely dissolved in our brine, and we're going to set that aside for a moment. So now for the herbs and spices, and you can play around with the ratios however you like to bring different flavors forward. I really like a combination of 2 tablespoons of peppercorn, 1 tablespoon of coriander seed, 1 teaspoon of celery seed, a little bit of crushed red pepper for some heat. We're going to use 2 cloves of garlic that we'll give a quick smash to, as well as some fresh cilantro and fresh dill from the garden. So let's go ahead and get all of that added into our mason jar. And you don't have to use a mason jar. You can use any type of jar you like, just as long as it has a lid that's going to close. Since we're not going to be canning these, you don't need any special type of jar. Canning them for shelf storage. Since these are fridge pickles, they're going to be good to go just as they are. So we're going to pop in our garlic. We're going to take our fresh herbs, and again, I have some beautiful fresh dill from the garden, as well as a little bit of fresh cilantro that's already started to go to seed. So we're going to add that right into our jar. And we're going to take a cucumber. Our cucumbers weren't perfectly ready in the garden yet. We're still a little bit early, so I've got a hothouse English cuke that we're going to use. And so I'm just going to cut the ends off of that, and we're just going to go ahead and make it into some nice, whoop, one gets away, rounds that we're going to use for sandwich pickles. But you could go ahead and cut these into spears. You could cut them, you could leave them whole if you were using Kirby cukes or anything like that. And cucumbers are really ideal for making pickles because, like we mentioned before, they're 95% water. And what's going to happen is the salt in the brine is going to encourage the liquid to come out of the cucumber, and we're going to push all that flavor from our pickling liquids back in its place. Meanwhile, the acid from the vinegar is going to go ahead and help us preserve the crunch and freshness of those cucumbers. So I've got about as many cucumber rounds as I can fit into my mason jar, and so we're just going to take our brine, pour it right on over the top. And you want to make sure that all of your cucumbers are covered, but if you have a little bit of brine left, no worries. We're going to close this up, give it a little shaky shake, get all those herbs and spices nicely distributed. And so we're going to go ahead, shake this up. We're going to stick this into the jar overnight. 2 days is even better. It's going to really develop that nice, refreshing, crunchy pickle flavor. So I'm going to go ahead and stick these in the fridge. I have another jar that I've made. Let's pull those out and give them a taste. So I've got some pickles here that I made the other day. Let's go ahead and give them a try. A little bit of seed on there. How good are these? Super crunchy, refreshing. You got the garlic, a little bit of heat from that chili pepper that we threw in there, all that nice pickly dill flavor. You know, I take it back. These are probably not going to make it onto sandwiches. Just going to keep on eating them. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you grow too many cucumbers this summer and that you make some pickles out of them, because these are just delicious.